an awful lot of elderly, infirm people. It's not a time that you want to evacuate people in any situation, but it's probably the worst time to be evacuating the elderly and the infirm.
That's very correct. Yes, I think the police are doing a marvellous job at the moment evacuating obviously the people that are in the vicinity. Obviously they're obviously trying to liaise with us the best possible, and if they are concerned about someone that they're actually evacuating out of their vehicle, out of their house, then obviously they'll liaise with us, and we'll send somebody over. We've got paramedics on standby. We've got fast response vehicles also on standby, and fully crewed ambulances on standby, just waiting in the sidelines, basically.
Warren Downey from the Ambulance Service, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed.
Well, a very good afternoon to those of you joining us here this Sunday, December the 11th, here on Sky News. This is the top story that we're following. A huge fire is burning at a key oil depot near Hemel Hempstead after it was rocked by 3 explosions which occurred just after 6 a.m. this morning. The first blast was heard up to 40 miles away, while nearby residents said they were woken by what they described as a loud boom as their houses shook. Police say that 2 people are now being treated for serious injuries and 34 for minor injuries.
These are the key points. Police say they're expecting more explosions at the Buncefield fuel terminal in Green. The fire could take days to go out.
The blasts were being treated as an accident. Flames shot hundreds of feet into the air.
Nearby buildings, including houses, were damaged by the force of the explosions.
Well, the blasts themselves occurred at the Buncefield fuel terminal in Green near Hemel Hempstead.
Nearby houses were damaged and hotels evacuated, with the effects of the blast heard as far away as Oxfordshire.
It is a major distribution terminal storing oil, petrol and kerosene. As a key supplier of aviation fuel for Heathrow Airport. You can get a sense of the layout from that picture.
The first explosion happened at just after 6 a.m.
2 smaller blasts were heard at around 6:20.
More than 100 firefighters are battling the flames, which have been rising 200 feet into the air.
There are also concerns over pollution. Smoke rising from the flames has already forced part of the nearby M1 motorway to close.
And the large plume can be seen heading eastward. Satellite pictures have revealed that.
Well, let's go live now to Sky's Jeff Mead in Hemel Hempstead. Jeff Mead broke that story as it occurred. You phoned it through to us actually because you heard it. It woke you up, so you were asleep at the time. But I mean, what's happening now? You can see this thick plume of smoke, and there have been concerns about the colour because it was this thick black colour beforehand. Now it's changing. It's getting lighter.
That's right. I mean, as you say, heard that at 6:05 this morning. Like many thousands of people in this part of the country were woken up by what appeared at first to be something like an aircraft crash. It certainly had that sort of terrible sound. We now know, fortunately, that wasn't the case. Fortunately, there are not thought to be any fatalities as a result of this, but the outcome of this fire is still very, very far from being resolved. You can see, as you pointed out, the fumes behind me. Look at the scale of that high pillar of smoke still pouring into the sky, as it has been doing for the last over 5 hours now. There is concern about what's in there, the volatile chemicals, the carcinogens that are given off when fuel oil ignites like this. And we've heard from a number of experts on Sky News this morning that the colour of the smoke is significant. It's turned from black to grey to paler grey now, and as you see, Juliet, it's still pouring out from there.
We're hoping to get a satellite picture actually. There it is, which just gives you an idea of just how vast this is. You can see there the light normal cloud, and there what can only be described as that black smudge, really representing that smoke coming out of that area. And the explosion heard across a wide radius. We've actually had people emailing us from parts of London, some of them a little bit further afield, some people emailing us from Bicester in Oxfordshire, telling us that they felt this vibration, people talking about a fear fearing that it had initially been perhaps an earthquake. Some people suspecting that maybe there had been some kind of an explosion caused by a plane falling out of the sky. From what the police have been saying, of course, it does appear that this was an accident, although naturally there will be an investigation into that to ascertain the causes. But Jeff Mead has been standing by following the day's events. Jeff.
Yes, as well as the obvious concern about the pollution from that huge black pillar still streaming from the Buncefield depot, there is also the risk, and the very real risk, of further explosions. We heard one within the last hour. I've just been speaking to a senior official from the ambulance service. He said his crews were cleared away from that area by police. They are very aware that while that continues to burn, while there is that ferocity of the fire there is a risk because with 16 million litres of fuel, there is still a very real risk that some of it has not yet burned off and could still explode. It's been a long, difficult morning for the emergency services. Let's hear from my colleague Paul Brennan, who's been charting the day's events.
The blast was so loud it woke people from their beds more than 40 miles away. A huge explosion just after 6 a.m, sending flames hundreds of feet into the air and turning the clear winter sky black with smoke. Tanker driver Terry Hine had arrived at the depot minutes earlier.
We went up to the end of the terminal where the holding tanks are, queued up as normal, but me and a couple of Texaco drivers noticed that there was a large mist coming down, rolling off the tops of the tank, and so I pulled onto the bays, the loading bays, and noticed that everything had tripped out, all the electric. Where the guy in the bill of lading room in the office where you get your bill of lading, he turned everything off and ordered us all to leave, get off the site as quick as possible. There was me and 5 other drivers. We was all kind of in a line walking towards the gate, and it was just a massive, massive explosion.
Out of my daughter's bedroom, the flames were, which is right back over there, the flames are massive, and we didn't know what was going on. Thought it was a bomb or an aeroplane going down, or we just didn't know.
The guys are saying, the DHL guy that was there just was saying that the building behind them has been flattened, which is probably about half a mile actually from where the terminal is.
First reports of the blast were followed within minutes by extraordinary footage captured by Sky News viewers on their mobile phones and home video cameras.
Folks, keep going, please. Keep going, you'll be arrested. Okay?
Damage to surrounding areas has been extensive. Walls have collapsed, windows shattered. Had this been a weekday, the staff here would have been ripped to shreds by flying glass. Thankfully, at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, these business units were deserted. But such is the intensity of the heat and the volatility of the materials involved, it's still too dangerous for fire crews to enter the depot and attack the root of the blaze.
As a result of the operation at the scene, we are anticipating that there will be further explosions during the morning, and we want to reassure the public that that is nothing untoward and is now expected.
We did have a fairly major factory fire to deal with from the explosion as well, so we had 6 fire engines deal with that fire outside the perimeter. What we will do is gain enough foam stocks from neighbouring fire services such as Essex and also from the industry, and then really you work from the outside in, but you need enough foam to keep that going, because if you stop that attack at any time before you've done the whole site, then it will just reignite. So that's why it will take a bit of time to make sure we have enough foam stock.
The local MP is himself a former firefighter.
At the end of the day, you can't put this sort of fire out. I've fought these sort of fires myself down in Essex, and you can't put them out. You can only starve them with fuel. What we have to do now is make sure that we get the right sort of foam tenders in, the right sort of equipment to actually make sure it doesn't spread.
Miraculously, there have been no fatalities. There are 36 confirmed casualties, but only 4 of them are described as being seriously injured. But the operation to put this fire out could take several days. Paul Brennan, Sky News.
Well, that's the latest scene there live from Hemel Hempstead. That plume of smoke there really causing concern amongst local people, and the various chemicals, etc. Speculation as to what's likely to loiter in the atmosphere. A lot of people writing in response to this, what they've seen and their own anxieties. But that's the latest that we've got here. We've also received some satellite images of the scene. Hazel Murray, our weather expert, now joins us to take us through those pictures. Hazel.
Thanks, Julia. Well, this is what we're looking at. You can see the white at the top of the picture. That's just ordinary cloud, and clearly this is the smoke. Now, if we'd had any kind of wind at all overnight and early this morning, we could well have expected this to have been starting to drift much further now, much further upwards in the atmosphere. But of course, overnight we had clear skies, we had fog, and what we've actually got is what is called an inversion layer. You sometimes see it late on a summer's evening when the air just can't escape, but you also see it at this time of year. And basically what it means is that we're capped by a layer of slightly warmer air, which would not normally be the case. Normally, the higher up you get, the colder it gets. But we've got this capping of warmer air because it's so cold down on the ground in the southeast. So as this smoke has been rising, it gets to a certain level and it can't really go up any further, and therefore it's just spreading out. And because there's no wind, it's not blowing away, it's just gradually spreading. And of course the same is true of the sound, and that's why the sound was heard so distantly. I was woken by it first thing this morning, but also we've had reports as far afield as Holland and Belgium, because the sound, instead of escaping up into the atmosphere, was forced outwards. And basically the bad news is that we are not going to see a lot in the way of wind over the next couple of days. If we take a look at the weather, in fact, you can see that at the moment absolutely nothing in the way of wind at all, but gradually over the next 24 hours you can see that that is working its way down. We're going to get a little bit in the way of winds coming through. That's going to push it away just a little bit as these winds come down from the northwest. It's the air mass moving down, and I think we'll eventually find a westerly, northwesterly wind, but it's never really going to amount to much. And then once that area of cloud and rain has gone through, we're reverting back to these very still nights. And even though that is going to go through, it's going to be a dying feature, so the winds are going to be quite weak behind it. So I don't think it's going to push it through that much. In addition, when the rain falls, what we're going to find is that it's actually going to be bringing the particulate masses that are in the air down onto the ground. Now, as far as I understand it, we don't think there's anything toxic, but nevertheless it is going to perhaps bring dirty rain, the sort that we sometimes see, for instance, from the Sahara. We'll actually be seeing those smoky particulates falling out. So it will get washed clean a little bit, but then after that, as I say, we've got very still air for the next couple of days, and it could well be that we're talking about smog-like conditions. So if we turn back and look once again at that satellite shot, the infrared shot, showing exactly where the smoke is. Here you are, you can see it again. This black mass is the smoke, the white areas are just the cloud. I think we're going to see that smoke and that cloud around for the next couple of days, and in fact areas in the southeast already much cloudier than they would have been otherwise today, and that is the effect of that just drifting its way further out.
Hazel, thank you very much for that. We're joined in the studio by Jeff Charlton from Disaster Advice. Jeff, the police have been very quick to say that they don't think that this is a terrorist attack, that they think this is an accident. At the same time as saying that, they're probably going to be making sure that security is tight at depots and other similar chemical plants across the country.
I would have thought so. The police or the government agencies are never going to raise the public's fear of a terrorist event, but at the same time, unless they know the actual cause of this, then they won't rule it out, I would imagine. I would have thought a good gauge of whether this, what their concerns are, is exactly what you've just said. Will they be raising security at other petroleum establishments and chemical warehouses? These coma sites, I think there's 1,200 in the UK. these sites could be potential targets if it was a terrorist. We mustn't say it was, it probably wasn't, but it's something that someone must be looking at the moment. I mean, as we said earlier, was this a good day for it? I said at the beginning, no, it was a little bit 50-50, but from the weather reports that we've just seen, it's starting to look more and more that it's going to be a longer lasting hazard than it would have been.
Inevitably, the issue about the location of this type of depot, this type of plant, is going to be raised again. This is obviously in a pretty residential area, lots of people around. What kind of considerations are taken into account when they decide where they're going to put a fuel depot or any kind of plant like this?
Okay. I think it depends on what year this place was established. The first thing is that we've got to see is that it's a distribution depot, and as a distribution depot, it's got to supply fuel to various airports or various stations or whatever. So the distribution location is probably the most important thing to economics of it. But when we look back over 100 years and we start to see where did people put industry and smelly or dangerous types of environment, they always put them, when we're talking about Greater London, they always put them on the east side because the wind normally blows from the east to the west. So any contamination or smoke plumes, I'm going back to the early 20th century, the smoke always went from east to west and went away from London. What we've got here is that we've got a major incident where the smoke, and what we've just seen from the satellite view, that the smoke's actually coming towards London, and the cloud that we can see and the inversion layer could now hold that smoke down. The second problem now is that we've seen that the still air that we've got, we're not likely to see a plume develop where the actual, we can see a plume, and I'm talking about now a movement plume where this contamination could be expected to move to. Wind speeds under 20 kilometres an hour, we're not going to see a plume develop. So we're going to get a swell, and that swell is going to, we don't know yet, but it could start to come along into London area, certainly North London, and start affect people there too.
Well, underscoring all that is this montage of pictures that you can see here on the left-hand side of the screen. People have been writing in, they've been sending us pictures. We've also been obtaining pictures from other media sources, and you can get here just a sense of the force of that blast, the mangled wreckage of that car. Look at the trees behind it, the leaves completely singed off. Look at that building, the front completely destroyed. And again, the scene enveloped in this cloud of smoke that a lot of people have been concerned about, talking about the fear that perhaps it could loiter in the atmosphere for some time. Concerns over the health of people, especially those suffering from respiratory diseases. Look at that plume of smoke there, thick black, shot earlier in the day, winged by that fire. Well, joining us in the studio is Robert Young, who's also an expert in disaster management, also a former officer from the Thames Valley Police. Now, about half an hour ago, we were talking to Hans Michaels, who's an engineering professor from Imperial College, and although he wasn't trying to preempt the line of inquiry by the police, or indeed trying to attribute a cause, because at this stage the police say this is not sabotage, it was an accident. But the point that the professor was making is that perhaps one of the lines of inquiry that the police and indeed the other experts will have to focus on is the storage, but more specifically the pipelines, the network of pipelines that would have pumped through some of this fuel.
I think when you begin to piece together all the evidence that we have, and the police would clearly have more evidence, but when you begin to piece it together, what we do know is there has been a catastrophic failure of something. Pipeline, a tank, something has failed dramatically. And once the fire subsides to the point that the fire service can get investigators in there, along with forensic investigators, then we will begin to understand more the cause. The police will be talking to the same people that you've been speaking to, the drivers, the 2 or 3 members of staff that were on site, because there was clearly evidence before it exploded, people being shouted at to get off site. There was clearly evidence that something was afoot, and maybe there were sensors that were sounding. So the police will have more information than we've got about the cause. But I go back to the point that I keep saying, whatever it was, it was catastrophic. It was a massive failure, and the industry will be learning a huge number of lessons from this.
But presumably in their investigations, they're not just going to be taking eyewitness accounts and also gleaning the opinions of the experts. They're also going to be using some of these pictures, because each picture, it tells a story of devastation, but at the same time, there are perhaps components within those pictures that only an expert would recognise.
Oh yes, and these pictures and other news media pictures, as well as I suspect that the police will be using military resources, or their own resources, in terms of some aerial shots that will help in terms of gaining just that. And there it is now on the screen. The police helicopter is up, and the images will be being beamed back direct into the Gold Command Centre at the police headquarters at Welwyn, and that will be driving the strategic direction of this whole incident. But these pictures will be used time and time again by the police, the fire service, emergency services, and all the emergency agencies that research incidents such as this to find the cause.
But how long would this investigation take? Because it's clearly not safe for the police to go there at the moment, because the main objective has to be to contain this, to put the fire out. And given the welter of material they'll have to fall back on and the sheer size of the site, when could the police feasibly get moving on this, and how long is the inquiry going to take? Because it's going to be very involved.
Well, if we look at how long is the inquiry going to take, it will take a very, very long time.
Are we looking at years?
I would say that you would be getting early indications coming out from the inquiry after maybe 6 months, but 12 to 18 months will be the sort of time you're looking at for the final report. With an incident like this, sadly what you are losing, all the time you see those flames, you are losing evidence. Evidence is literally being burned and vaporised away.
So that could lengthen any investigation?
Yes, it certainly makes it less certain. The more evidence you lose, you lose certainty as to cause.
And in the meantime, this site still has to be kept secure, and that's another irony within itself, that you've got three jobs going on here. On the one hand, you have to damp down this fire, contain it, stop it from spreading. At the same time, keep it secure, because for anybody who may be watching this with malicious intent, they may see this as particularly useful for their particular agenda.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. That's a very strong message, because it's not only the goodies that are watching this, but the bad people in the world are also watching this to see police response, and they will recognise the impact of this has on the national infrastructure, and we have to be very well aware that terrorists around the world are watching.
Because this is still an ongoing concern.
Bringing back Jeff Charlton from Disaster Advice into the discussion, looking at those pictures, Jeff, one is reminded of the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein was retreating from Kuwait, set the oil fields on fire, and we had those awful bleak pictures of huge plumes of smoke going up into the atmosphere in very much the same way. What kind of lessons did they learn from that?
Well, I'm not sure what lessons they learned. I worked in Kuwait during that period on the reconstruction, and there were 700 fires that looked similar to these surrounding the oil fields of Kuwait city. When the wind went the wrong way, the city was engulfed in midnight, and what we found was that air intakes of buildings were contaminated with fuel oil odour. People wouldn't work in their buildings, and this is where people were putting up with all sorts of deprivation. But when it came to breathing in fuel oil in buildings, they didn't want to do it, which is understandable. And obviously, it depends on how low that oil or smoke comes into a city. Certainly in Kuwait, you saw there wasn't an awful lot of vehicles because most of them have been stolen. But it can increase accidents. That's the bottom line.
Talking more generally about what kind of impact this is going to have in the next few days, presumably schools are going to be closed, many businesses are going to be affected in the immediate area and the area downstream from this plume of smoke.
Well, I think by the end of the day, I would imagine that we'll see the fire brigade starting to tell us whether or not there's likely to be more explosions. That's going to be the first thing. The smoke is something that they can map, or hopefully map from plume management software. people's businesses are going to be affected, and some companies that are in that area will start to utilise what's called hot sites and start to move to secondary locations if they've planned for this type of disaster. All businesses now should be planning for this sort of disaster and to be planning for exclusion from their business place and place of work.
OK, well, let's go now to Hemel Hempstead, but specifically Hemel Hempstead General Hospital, where our reporter Sarah Hughes is standing by. Sarah, I understand that there's due to be a news conference held there shortly, so no doubt they'll be updating us on the number of people who are injured in this explosion.
That's right, we're due to hear from Howard Borkett-Jones, the medical director here at Hemel Hempstead General Hospital, at around about 1:45 today. We understand the latest casualty figures are that there were 36 casualties in total. 9 of those were conveyed to Hemel Hempstead Hospital by ambulance. 1 has since been transferred to Watford General Hospital with respiratory problems, and another has been admitted to Hemel Hempstead Hospital. The remainder have been treated in accident and emergency. The 34 are walking wounded, they've been described as, mainly with cuts and bruises, and many of those have been discharged from hospital here, just walking wounded. So Hemel Hempstead Hospital and the Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire Ambulance Service say that people were very fortunate indeed that there weren't more injuries. When we spoke to the ambulance spokesman a few minutes ago, he said that because this explosion happened at around 6 o'clock in the morning, many people in the vicinity were in their beds. They were protected by their duvets, by the mattresses they were sleeping on, so only their faces were exposed, and many were indeed protected. He had also spoken to the 2 men who were closest to the explosion. They were knocked off their feet by a draft from the explosion. They didn't suffer any burns. They were extremely fortunate indeed, mainly shocked and suffering from cuts and bruises really, but no burns for them, and just those 2 patients in a more serious condition with respiratory problems at the moment. But we expect to get a more detailed update from the medical director here at Hemel Hempstead General Hospital at around about 1:45.
And Sarah, around 10 o'clock we had that press conference from the police and the fire brigade, the police stressing to people what sort of steps they could take to protect themselves, staying indoors, keeping the windows closed, but also stressing that people shouldn't make unnecessary trips to the hospitals because there was concern that it could actually press resources or stretch resources that were already trying to cope with any potential fallout from this.
That's right. I mean, here at the hospital, we can look up the hill and see the huge cloud of smoke that is over Hemel Hempstead. That smoke is an irritant, according to the police. It will leave people coughing, it will irritate the eyes, it will lead to people feeling nauseous. But they say, unless you acutely need emergency assistance, please do not call 999. Don't call for an ambulance unless you really, really need it. Call your GP, call NHS Direct, or come into the hospital yourselves. Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire Ambulance Service say they are coping with the need at the moment. They have other counties on standby, but they are able to cope with the demand at the moment. And if anyone does really need assistance, then they should get in touch. But unless it is a real emergency, we need to let them get on with their jobs. So obviously they are stretched to the limit. They don't want people just to be ringing if they're coughing from the smoke. They should close all of their windows, stay indoors, and if they are worried, call NHS Direct or call their GP. And anything more serious, particularly those people who may have asthma or any respiratory problems anyway, should make sure they're inside, and any problems, call their GP. OK, well, that press conference due to be held within a few moments, but Sarah Hughes at Hemel Hempstead General Hospital for now. Thank you.
Well, let's bring you the latest pictures which I think show some of the people which have been evacuated from the surrounding area. This is from an out-of-town leisure centre. These are people that were obviously very close to the explosion or evacuated from their homes. You also understand that a number of people were evacuated from a hotel near to the source of the explosion. We saw earlier that in the immediate vicinity around the explosion, very severe damage to some of the buildings, and we can only be thankful that this explosion happened at the time that it did, because if it had happened during a weekday, during office hours, the casualty figure, I'm sure, would be far higher. At the moment we're looking at 36 people have been injured. Reports suggested initially 4 have been seriously injured, but now the suggestion is that only 2 people have been seriously injured. But when one looks at some of the pictures which have been coming out, of the area affected. A miracle really that not more people weren't injured. The concern now is very much centering on the issue of the smoke. Excuse me. Now, the smoke which is coming from this ongoing fire, and the potential for people to be affected by it. You can see there, that black area in the middle of the screen is not a cloud of an ordinary cloud. That is a cloud of smoke coming from the depot in Hemel Hempstead, which is still on fire, and that huge patch of smoke, you can get an idea of it. It's the size of Greater London, to the north of Greater London, but the size of Greater London stretching out, heading eastwards. The concern now is the effects of that smoke, and that smoke is going to be around for some few days to come. And what the police are doing is advising people that are in the area affected by that smoke to shut their windows, to stay inside. The temptation, of course, will be to go outside to look at this spectacle, but to stay inside because that smoke can cause irritation to the skin, and obviously you don't want to be inhaling any of that smoke. And they're saying that if you are perhaps downstream of the smoke plume and your windows have been blown out by the explosion, to evacuate your homes. That is the advice from the police.
A number of people reporting structural damage as well to their homes. We've also seen some of these pictures as well testifying to that, where cars have been wrecked, buildings, the front of them trashed effectively, also windows just blown out. And as you saw there from some previous pictures, people being evacuated to places of safety, although nobody knows when they'll be able to return to their homes. But this is a summary of the events so far that have occurred this Sunday, and a key oil depot near Hemel Hempstead is in flames after being rocked by 3 huge explosions just after 6 a.m. this morning. Police say that 36 people are
in the case of Iraq was obliterated. In the case of North Korea,
one of Britain's biggest fuel storage facilities, operated by Total and part-owned by Texaco, directly connected by pipeline to Lindsey Oil Refinery and Heathrow. Structural damage is widespread in the surrounding light industrial estate, with reports at least one building has collapsed.
Our national conscience.
All the aluminium walls had all been blown in.
Has gone by unheeded by at least some of these drivers. You can see there the queues at the forecourt, quite extensive, but the message: there is no need to panic buy petrol, as there is plenty of fuel that is getting through. There is no danger of a shortage, so hopefully those queues should reduce in the course of the day.
Well, the blast happened at the Buncefield fuel terminal in Leverstock Green near Hemel Hempstead. Nearby houses were damaged and hotels evacuated, with the effects of the blast heard as far away as Oxfordshire. It's a major distribution terminal storing oil, petrol and kerosene, and is a key supplier of aviation fuel for Heathrow Airport. The first explosion happened at just after 6 a.m. 2 smaller blasts were heard around 6:20. More than 100 firefighters are battling the flames, which have been rising 200 feet into the air. There are also concerns over pollution. Smoke rising from the flames has already forced part of the nearby M1 motorway to close, and the large plume can be seen heading eastwards.
Well, our crisis expert, Robert Young, who's a member of the Institute of Civil Defence and Disaster Studies, he's also a former police officer with Thames Valley, has been in the studio for the bulk of the morning, really taking us through the events and adding his expertise to the commentary. And I want to pick up on this point of managing the consequences, because we saw an example of that from some videotape footage that came through to the Sky Centre, and I'm specifically referring to the evacuation of people from their homes, taking them to a place of safety away from the danger zones, but in this case danger because of the thickness of the smoke and the potential health risks there. That's one bit of it, but obviously it goes much deeper than that.
Oh yes. I worked for the Resilience Centre at Cranfield University, and our message there to industry and to all the emergency services, anybody that will listen to us, is that you need to plan ahead of an incident like this in order to reduce the consequences of this event. Now, we've seen video footage of factories, of office accommodation blasted. Now, in there will be IT equipment which, if those companies have not backed up safely, if they haven't got secure systems, they would lose entire IT databases. Now, managing the consequences can be as small as simply backing up your IT systems or having good call-out systems or whatever. But the consequences of this will be massive. The ramifications will be huge. And it doesn't matter where you look, there will be big consequences. And those consequences could be long-term, could lead to job losses, could lead to company closures, if people haven't prepared for this kind of incident.
Now, I'm not for one moment suggesting that some of the companies affected by this are not prepared, but it's certainly a message that I remember being rammed home in 1999, because there was talk about this millennium bug, and that if you didn't standardise your computer equipment, you'd be left behind, the systems would crash, and again, the potential consequences there, that according to what your business did, how substantial its interests, etc., that it could take you a couple of years to catch up with your rivals in the field. So it's a similar concept being applied here.
It is, and sadly, whilst we would like to think that most companies have learned the lessons from the millennium bug and from other incidents, sadly the truth is that I would guess that about 50 or 60% of the companies on that local industrial estate, let alone the people that will be involved in the under the path of the plume or wherever, will be affected by this to a considerable degree.
Right, but then that's an indication of a state of mind that perhaps whenever people talk about disaster management, we see it in terms of an action that causes a consequence, in terms of economic damage, in terms of a human cost. But to actually incorporate a piece of the infrastructure, however small within that, in terms of transport, in terms of getting an office working, etc., somehow or other that's seen in isolation as somehow separate from the big picture.
It is, and the sad truth is that it's seen as an expense which usually falls off the end of the corporate table, because it's very expensive with minimal payoff. But if those companies had invested in managing the consequences of any incident, and this is a good example, then they will be reaping the benefits now.
One of the other consequences, and it's certainly been a point that's been alluded to by some of our viewers, is yes, they have been talking about the damage that their homes have experienced, and they've said, well, hang on, some of us have actually been told to leave for obvious reasons. We don't know when we can go back, and above all, we don't know how it's going to affect our insurance, for example. Again, that's quite important.
Well, it is. It's a massive thing, and no doubt the insurance companies will be watching this and thinking about the cost of insurance for people living in and around areas like this. I suspect that actually the insurance companies have factored it in before the incident, but they will certainly be watching it now.
But there is a possibility, though, that when people are allowed back into their homes, etc., they may find that the policies themselves may be increased precisely because something like this has happened.
Well, we've certainly seen that in terms of the flood risk. In terms of floods that we've seen around the country, we've seen the price of insurance going up, and we've also seen insurance companies adding the fact that terrorism would not be covered on many household policies today. So if we find that this is not a terrorist incident, at least the people will be covered by insurance.
I'd like to bring in Jeff Charlton from Disasters UK here. Jeff, the last time I saw you, we were in the City of London talking about the possibility of a terrorist strike there, and to pick up on a point that was being raised by Juliet and Roger, the whole issue of people not being careful about backing up all the data on their systems because of events like this. How much of a problem is it?
Roger said that maybe 50%, and lots of companies, when they're interviewed, will say that we've got a business continuity disaster recovery plan. The trouble is that the majority of them have never tested it, so it's worthless, or almost worthless. So in fact, it can actually be more detrimental to have a bad plan that hasn't been tested than one that then you haven't got one at all. You're not relying on something that's not going to work. I think what Roger just said is absolutely essential, that people should have these plans. And you know something, the government has really tried to get people to understand the significance and importance of having a business continuity plan. backups, an awful lot of people also, by the way, back up their data and keep it on the premises of where they work. So they actually find that they're excluded from entry. This may or may not become a scene of crime, and people may not be able to go back into these buildings anyway for some time.
How widespread is it, though, as a problem? Is it affecting as many as 50 to 60%, particularly those smaller businesses?
The bigger business, under the rules of the FSA, Financial Services Authority, major banks and financial institutions have to have, by law now, a business continuity plan. This comes under the Basel II agreement and certain international Sarbanes-Oxley, things like this, where financial institutions have to have the backup. But ordinary companies know, as Roger said, most of them see that it's an insignificant risk or a cost, not likely to happen, and we can think on our feet on the day. These companies, and certainly the warehouses and offices that we can see there, if they sell things, the chances are their sales ledger, their computer systems there, will be inoperable anyway, because the toxic, not just the toxic, this soot or smoke is probably going to be corrosive anyway. Their IT systems will likely collapse in any event.
Okay, well, some breaking news which has just come into us here, that parts of the M1, which we know have been closed already, obviously the southern part of the M1, are going to be remaining closed for the rest of the day, it seems. That's the latest news on the situation with regard to the M1. Of course, we've been speaking to people down in Hemel Hempstead all day, throughout the morning, throughout the day, to get their reactions as to what's happened. This is what some of them had to say.
It was about 6:05, a massive explosion. I don't think any damage in the house, and we just got up, the wife and kids woke up, obviously, frightened the life out of them, and well, we've moved up to Gaybridge for the time being, which is just up the road to my brother's house. I'm in out of my daughter's bedroom, the flames were, you know, which is right back over there, the flames are massive, and you know, we didn't know what was going on, thought it was a bomb or an aeroplane going down, or you know, we just didn't know.
I was awake this morning when the explosion took place, and we live about 2 miles the other side of town. My office is actually by where the explosion is, and I was here early this morning, maybe 6:10, something like that, and it was just incredible. So there's a lot of damage to buildings, a lot of cladding. It's blown off of the buildings, you know, the steel frames, and you know, the guys are saying, the DHL guy that was there just was saying that the building behind them has been flattened, which is probably about half a mile actually from where the terminal is. So it was incredible, and it was a long explosion. It wasn't just a boom, it was a long explosion. The houses rattled. It lasted 3 or 4 seconds. It wasn't just a single explosion. And then there's been one or possibly 2 since. And it was calm as well. There were no emergency services immediately. It seemed as if everybody, it was a surreal experience. And well, as you can see.
Just went and bang, you know. It sounded like something, sounded like a missile or something. You know what, it wasn't, but it sounded like there was a big whoosh and a bang, and that was it. You know, frightened us all. We didn't know what to do. As you can see, the police and we only live around the corner. But our house is all right. There's other houses in the street that have had the windows blown out and whatever as well. So I don't know. It's all very frightening.
Well, that was the account, excuse me, of eyewitnesses, local people living in the area, speaking to the Sky News reporters earlier in the day as this story first began to unfold. One of the other components to this story was a press conference that was held earlier in the day around 10 o'clock, and the Chief Constable of Hertfordshire actually gave the media and the viewers an update on how that incident occurred.
All indications at this stage are that this was an accident. However, clearly we will keep an open mind, as with all investigations, until we can confirm that for certain. We currently have around 100 police officers working at the scene, with higher numbers of fire service personnel also at the scene. As a result of the operation at the scene, we are anticipating that there will be further explosions during the morning, and we want to reassure the public that that is nothing untoward and is now expected. In terms of the site itself, there were a number of staff at the site at the time of the accident, and work is clearly still being undertaken to assess and collate information about their status. However, at this stage we believe there are around 36 casualties, And I would emphasise that the vast majority of these are not serious injuries and are being treated at local hospitals. We think at the moment about 4 people are more seriously injured.
Well, that was the Chief Constable who was talking earlier at a press conference that was held around 10 o'clock, updating the press and the viewers, of course, about what had been happening. The slight change on those figures because 36 people had been injured. At the time, 4 of them had been seriously hurt. That figure has now fallen to 2. We know from an earlier statement that came through from our reporter, Sarah Hughes, who's at the Hemel Hempstead General Hospital. She said that one of these people who was injured has now been transferred to Watford General Hospital. And we suspect that the person may well be suffering from some sort of respiratory difficulties, which is understandable given the amount of smoke that's been recorded in the area. The pictures really speaking for themselves. Now, the first reports of this explosion came through around 5 minutes past 6 this morning, and the police, the ambulance, the fire crews actually swung into action with a plan to get to the site immediately and to try to evacuate. Now, we know that people living nearby have been taken out of their homes, taken to places of safety because there are concerns obviously about this smoke and the threat to their health. We don't know how long they'll be kept away from their homes. The advice to other people living nearby is to keep their doors and their windows closed and to resist the temptation to stay outside or to even go outside to see how this cloud of smoke is progressing. It may well be tempting, but it could be hazardous to the health because remember, this storage depot was actually holding combustible materials. And again, you can just see there from the smoke just how volatile this material is and the concerns that some environmentalists have expressed about the impact on the environment. We've been showing satellite pictures throughout the morning just to give you an idea about what the cameras overhead are picking up. And if you actually saw a map of Britain, you would just see the normal wispy clouds that's synonymous with this time of the year, but underneath that, this big dark smudge really showing you this cloud and exactly the sense of damage that it's causing. But let's now go to Hemel Hempstead General Hospital, where this press conference is about to get underway, and the staff will update us. Here it is.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I just am now in position to give you an update on the casualties that have been received here at Hemel Hempstead Hospital. Up to now, we have received 39 casualties from the incident, of which 37 are minor, cuts and bruises and, generally speaking, injuries from flying glass. There is one patient who's under observation here, admitted to the ward, and there's one patient whom we transferred earlier to Watford General Hospital, our sister hospital, for respiratory support. His injuries are serious and he's under constant observation in the intensive care unit, but his injuries are not critical at this stage. But this is an evolving situation in the nature of the injuries that he's had, which are due to the blast and that the effect of the blast on his lungs. We're keen to make sure that our staff that may be listening to news updates do try to come into the hospital despite transport difficulties, and we would ask any staff that can do so to check with local news media or the news intranet sites for travel details. In addition to those casualties that we've received, there are also about 15 police officers who have been checked at Watford General Hospital, and a further 7 or 8 here who have been checked, having been in the vicinity of the plume, and none of those are in any danger. They're being checked and released as we speak now. Those are the essential details. I'm happy to answer some questions if I can.
Sarah Hughes, Sky News. Can you tell us, in terms of the people that you have treated, how many of them were actually working at the depot or how many were living in the vicinity?
There have been, I believe the latest information I've had is 3 that were close to the site or on duty there and were affected at the time of the blast that we have seen here. There are obviously, I think there were a few others who haven't been significantly injured.
The figures you're giving total for the whole
accident or just for this area? I mean, are there other hospitals that have figures you don't have?
There may be other hospitals. The other hospital in our group, which is Watford General, has had the one that we've transferred there deliberately, and the 15 or so police officers for checkups. There aren't any other injuries that we're aware of that have been presenting to other local A&E departments, but we will catch up on that information as we go through the day.
How prepared were you as a hospital to deal with this sort of incident?
Well, we have very thorough and often rehearsed and practiced major incident policy guidelines. And what we've done is to put ourselves onto what we call a standby footing, which means that we are scaling up our level of readiness. We've got, in particular, equipment and drugs being brought in to make sure we've got enough respiratory support should we experience more patients with respiratory complications in the coming hours or days. The rehearsals that we go through are done both with on tabletop exercises and also in full-scale rehearsals, and we do that and we liaise very closely with the police, fire and rescue and ambulance in doing those rehearsals. So this is something that is actually fairly familiar territory for us in terms of responding to an incident of this sort, but not exactly like this.
One person who's injured quite badly who's been sent to Watford. Can you just outline the injuries he has? Was he close to the blast? Did smoke cause the problem?
Our understanding is he was about 200 metres from the blast, and he's got injuries to his lung as a result of the pressure wave. That's the nature of that problem.
Is that collapse lung or?
No, it isn't. I mean, I'm not going to go into the specific details, but it's what happens to the lungs after they're subjected to a sudden pressure wave, as happens in blast injuries.
Is there any indication that the smoke that's coming up now presents a health threat to the region?
Well, we're obviously liaising closely with the other emergency services that keep us advised. We understand that in general terms it's of low toxicity, but people might be experiencing some irritation of their respiratory system, some feeling of slight tightness in the chest or irritation or coughing, just as a result of exposure to a noxious chemical in the atmosphere. And we have been advising them to do so again, to say that if people are experiencing those sorts of respiratory symptoms, that they should contact their general practitioner or go to the local A&E department or to come to the A&E department here. As I said, we are prepared to see people if they've got respiratory complications and they want to be checked out.
Are there particular people who may be at risk? We think of people like such as asthma, that sort of thing, who might even make extra.
In particular, people who are susceptible to asthma would be a little bit more likely to get these sorts of symptoms of feelings of tightness in the chest, and other people, generally speaking, people who are a little older, who may have some chronic pulmonary disease, and they will be a little more susceptible than the normal population to getting a worsening of their normal respiratory problems.
Are officials warning you that this fire is likely to take days before it can be put out?
Yes, it's our understanding that because of the magnitude of the fire, it's going to be necessary to some extent to let it burn down, and it was anticipated that there would be possibly further explosions as other reserves of fuel near the centre of the fire become involved. I'm obviously not able to speak on behalf of the Fire and Rescue Service. They can fill you in more detail on at what stage they might plan to put a foam blanket over the fire at a point where they feel it's possible to get control over it.
The one who's under observation, his injuries, was he also working?
He's just received minor injuries and he's stable, but he is being kept under observation.
There's a lot of damage to some of the houses nearby with broken glass. How many injuries do you have from that?
Well, I haven't subdivided them, but there are the majority of the patients, those minor patients we saw, 30 or so, have got injuries from bits of flying glass or bits of flying masonry as a result of the injury. As a result of the blast.
If he's still on major alert?
We're on our the position we're on is a major incident standby, which means that we are ready to press the button to go up to full-scale major incident response, and we've got all our teams of staff on standby, as well as a central core of our senior staff in the hospital, just checking our level of readiness and monitoring the situation as we go.
I think you talked about the possibility of the situation escalating. What do you think about that?
I think that was a reference to the possibility that with regard to the effects of the plume, there might be more patients presenting to us with respiratory complications. I mean, it's a possibility. I think what we're wanting to say is we're trying to be ready for all eventualities. Obviously, we hope that most of the problem is now over in terms of the casualties presenting to us. But should that situation change, we don't want to be caught unawares.
And sorry, can you just repeat how many casualties you've received today here?
My latest update, as of a few minutes ago, was 39 injuries, including one serious, that's in intensive care, and one patient who's under observation. The other 37 were minor injuries, things like cuts and bruises, and those patients have been seen and have been discharged.
How many discharged overall?
Well, that would be 37 have been discharged overall, yes.
And then one patient, only one patient here and one patient.
That's right, at the moment.
So the chap in intensive care, is he here?
He's at Watford.
Right.
We transferred him earlier because we wanted to, he was stable, and we wanted to make sure that on site here we had the maximum number of intensive care facilities and respiratory support facilities should we get another wave of problems. So that's the example of our trying to make sure we're making best use of our facilities.
The 23 police officers who were also treated are separate from the 39 total?
They are, yes. They're just, and they're, as I said, they're basically checkups. None of those are particularly unwell.
Can you give us any indication how old the chap is in ICU?
I don't want to go into those details at the moment.
So the one who's under observation, did he actually work at the plant, or?
I believe he was is somebody who works in association with the plant. He was some distance away, but he had reason to be there.
Have you got any idea what's in the plea? What kind of gases?
I'm afraid I don't have that detail. The fire and rescue are liaising with the environmental scientists and chemists to get that detail.
Presumably that's something that you will be wanting to know soonish, so that you can factor that into your preparations.
Well, in general terms.
Yes, you're just hearing from a press conference there at Hemel Hempstead Hospital. We were hearing about the kind of injuries that people have suffered from. The good news out of this story is that the number of people that have been injured is relatively small. We're talking about total number of people who are injured as 39. We're talking about 2 serious injuries. One of the people that was injured was affected by the blast. There was some kind of problem with their lungs, which was caused by the blast itself. One of the people that was seriously injured is actually in Hemel Hempstead Hospital. The other has been taken to a hospital in Watford. We're joined by Jeff Charlton from Disaster Advice. One of the things that you were surprised at listening to that press conference was the number of police officers that have been taken into hospital to be checked for any kind of problems that they might have encountered from breathing in the fumes.
Absolutely. I find it incredible that emergency responders are exposed to a position where they need hospital checkup. These men should have been, or men and women, should have been adequately protected, and we saw some of the earlier photographs or some of the earlier film that police officers were standing within the hot zone and were just wearing paper masks. Now, for 15 people to go to hospital, I just find it absolutely incredible that they may have needed hospital treatment.
But at the end of the day, I suppose someone would say they have to go into these areas. They might not necessarily always have the right equipment with them.
Well, they should have the right equipment. This is something that we're expecting. We've been told, the government's told us, everybody's told us that we should expect not this type of incident, but a terrorist event. It could have been a chemical, a biological, a radiological dispersion device, and police and emergency responders should be fully equipped today to be within that vicinity. And if they can't be safe there, they should be out of the area.
I was going to say, Jeff, how much will the authorities be using this as an example of how they've reacted to a potential terrorist threat? We know that this, or we think that this particular incident wasn't a terrorist attack, but presumably it will provide a good case study for what kind of reaction they need to put in place.
Absolutely. I've got a concern immediately. You know, the hospital administrator there said that they've done desktop exercises and so on and so forth. But what surprised me is that this hospital, which is actually in the vicinity of the explosion and could be overcome by this smoke and soot, what precautions or procedures have they got? I can't believe that this hospital would be in a position to bring in a positive pressure of filtered air. So this could end up where you've got an emergency system downwind. It just seems incredible to me. Getting back to the point, I suppose, this could have been a chlorine release, it could have been a radiation dispersal device. People should start now to understand just how vulnerable huge amounts of population are from any type of event or release.
Well, just to remind you, the top story here on Sky News, the only story today, is the fact that there has been a large explosion at a fuel depot in Hemel Hempstead. It happened just after 6 o'clock this morning, at 5 minutes past 6. One large initial explosion followed by a couple of smaller explosions. You're seeing the live pictures out of Hemel Hempstead. The suggestion at this stage is that this is an accident, not a terrorist attack.
Good afternoon from Hemel Hempstead. It is December the 11th, and as you can see, today's major story is right behind me. 3 huge explosions rocked a key oil depot just outside the town centre of Hemel Hempstead. 39 people are injured, 2 of them seriously. Residents are forced out of their homes as cars, buildings and trees are destroyed by the blasts. The aftermath can be seen from space as the smoke from the fire spread south and east. Police warned there could be more explosions, with the blaze expected to burn on for days. We're going to be live at locations right around this area as the police and emergency services begin their investigations. Well, a huge fire has been burning since just after 6 o'clock this morning. You can see it still billowing up into the chill afternoon sky here on the outskirts of Hemel Hempstead. At around 3 minutes past 6 this morning, the first of 3 huge explosions which rocked this area and sent tremors through the air up to 40 or 50 miles away. Many people here lost their windows. Many buildings were caved in by the force of this explosion, which took place at Britain's 5th biggest oil depot. Now, the first blast shot these black smoke and fumes and flames 200 or 300 feet into the sky. It's amazing that there weren't more casualties. Police and emergency services here are saying at the moment that the casualty count is 39 and none of them are on the critical list. Nearby M1 from junction 6 to junction 10 has been closed down as the smoke envelops part of one of Britain's main arterial roads. So let's just remind ourselves exactly what has taken place here this morning. The blast happened at the Buncefield Oil Terminal in Leverstock Green near Hemel Hempstead. Nearby houses were damaged, hotels evacuated, with the effects of the blast heard as far away as Oxfordshire, Sussex and Surrey. This is a major distribution terminal storing oil, petrol and kerosene, and is a key supplier of aviation fuel for Heathrow Airport. So we were saying the first explosion happened at just after 6 a.m. on a quiet Sunday morning. Two similar blasts were heard at around 6:20 a.m. More than 100 firefighters are still battling the flames, huge flames still gushing into the air from this fuel plant. They've been, the flames alone have been rising 200 feet, the black clouds, many more. There are now concerns over pollution. The smoke rising from these flames has already forced part of the M1 to close down and many people to be evacuated. And large plumes can be seen heading southeast of the Buncefield plant. So let's just take you back through the unfolding events of the morning with Sky reporter Paul Brennan.
The blast was so loud it woke people from their beds more than 40 miles away. A huge explosion just after 6 a.m, sending flames hundreds of feet into the air and turning the clear winter sky black with smoke. Tanker driver Terry Hine had arrived at the depot minutes earlier.
We went up to the end of the terminal where the holding tanks are, queued up as normal, but me and a couple of Texaco drivers noticed that there was, a large mist coming down, rolling off the tops of the tank. And so I pulled onto the bays, the loading bays, and noticed that everything had tripped out, all the electric, where the guy in the bill of lading room in the office where you get your bill of lading, he turned everything off and ordered us all to leave and get off the site as quick as possible. There was me and 5 other drivers. We was all kind of in a line walking towards the gate, and it was just a massive explosion.
First reports of the blast were followed within minutes by extraordinary footage captured by Sky News viewers on their mobile phones and home video cameras, including one clip which caught one of the secondary blasts.
Out of my daughter's bedroom, the flames were, which is right back over there, the flames are massive, and we didn't know what was going on. Thought it was a bomb or an aeroplane going down, or we just didn't know.
Just went and bang, it sounded like something, sounded like a missile or something. You know what, it wasn't, but it sounded like there was a big whoosh and a bang, and that was it. Frightened us all. We didn't know what to do. As you can see, the police and we only live around the corner, but our house is all right. There's other houses in the street that have had the windows blown out and whatever as well, so I don't know. It's all very frightening.
Damage to surrounding areas has been extensive. These viewers' photographs showing the power of the shockwave which ripped through neighbouring streets. Walls have collapsed and windows shattered. Had this been a weekday, the staff here would have been ripped to shreds by flying glass. Thankfully, at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, these business units were deserted. But such is the intensity of the heat and the volatility of the materials involved, it's still too dangerous for fire crews to enter the depot and attack the route of the blaze.
What we will do is gain enough foam stocks from neighbouring fire services such as Essex and also from the industry, and then really you work from the outside in, but you need enough foam to keep that going, because if you stop that attack at any time before you've done the whole site, then it will just reignite. So that's why it will take a bit of time to make sure we have enough foam stock.
Miraculously, there have been no fatalities. There are 36 confirmed casualties, but only 4 of them are described as being seriously injured. But the operation to put this fire out could take several days. Paul Brennan, Sky News.
Well, you see here in Leverstock Green on the outskirts of Hemel Hempstead, I barely need to explain the scene to you, but the smoke is now still, what are we talking about, 7 hours after those explosions, still billowing up into this crisp December day, a couple of weeks before Christmas. Extraordinary thick clouds, and one can only imagine the content of those clouds, and we'll be hearing a bit more about the health and safety aspects. Obviously, one of the big concerns for people around here is exactly what's in there, and when they start touching close to the residential areas, how damaging is that going to be? And it's clearly the reason that the emergency services and the police have been asking people to evacuate from some of the areas closest in there. But these clouds, of course, are starting to spread many, many miles from the Buncefield fuel plant right across the south and east of England. As we heard, the explosion heard at least 50 miles away. I know I live in South London and I heard it rattling the windows at 6 o'clock this morning, and I'm sure several million other people were woken by the blast this morning. So let's get an idea of what the pattern of this smokestack could be now. Whether Lady Hazel Murray is standing by. She's been charting it. Tell us a little bit more about the pattern and where it could be heading, Hazel.
Yes, Jeremy. Well, as you can see here, we've got the satellite picture, and you can see very clearly this black mass that is the smoke. The white is the normal cloud, so you needn't worry too much about that. And you can see how it is spreading west, and it's also spreading both south and east. But initially we thought that it would be pushed out by the inversion layer, which is basically just the high pressure capping things and not letting it go up. But it seems that the winds are so slack that at least some of the smoke is now being able to rise. And in fact, where initially some areas were quite cloudy earlier on, it seemed like cloud, but it actually was smoke. Some of those areas are now clearing as some of the smoke is getting upwards. Now I think that's in basically good news, because obviously we don't want this just spreading around through Britain and Ireland. What we've also got, if we take a look at the weather graphics, is we've got an area of cloud and rain just generally working its way into the far north and west. Now, not much in the way of wind at all down here, but little by little, as that area of cloud and rain works its way southwards over the next couple of hours, and indeed over the next 12 to 18 hours, we'll find that the winds do pick up. And basically, I think we'll find that as that rain works its way down into the southeast, then we'll find the particulates that are in the air, in other words, the black bit of the smoke, will actually be washed down. Now, of course, if the smoke was toxic, that would be a major problem, but as I understand it, we don't have the toxicity. So basically this rain, when it arrives, and that's likely to be overnight, although there's not likely to be that much of it, is going to be just washing the air clean a little bit. Having said that, if we revert to the satellite picture, basically because I think the smoke's got into my graphics and they're not moving at all, we can see that indeed the fires are still burning now, and it looks like they're going to continue to burn for the next day or so. So we're going to continue to see this smoke over the next day or so. Still very light winds, and there is always the danger that instead of going up, it is going to be forced out. Now at the moment the winds are coming up from the southwest, but that is liable to change over the next 24 hours, I'd say, so that they come in from the northeast, so that at the moment we're tending to see that rain and the clouds pushing northwards and eastwards, but gradually we'll see that twisting round, so we could well see all of this mass of smoke just drifting its way further southwards over the next couple of days before it's finally put out altogether.
That's fascinating stuff, Hazel. I think it gives people a much better picture of where this cloud's going and the sort of as it dissipates across the country, and what the weather quality is like to be because of it. It's worth having a look at one of our cameras right in the heart of London, just close to Westminster here, which I think will give us a picture of the skyline across London. And clearly that skyline has been changed today because of the density of the smoke that's now mingling with this chill winter air across London. You can see the London Eye and the Palace of Westminster, Big Ben there, very much on the forefront of the horizon with this much darker than expected sky. And of course there's been fog in the air in parts of this southeast of England today, so fog in parts with this great black cloud starting to thin out and turn grey as it heads down towards London and the southeast, giving us a very unusual feel. There's a very strange colour pattern in the air. I'm sure that millions of people in the southeast of England are starting to see that. And of course this smokestack just behind where I'm standing now can be seen for tens and tens of miles around this region as well. So many people are getting a glimpse of this extraordinary disaster which has happened here at the Buncefield oil plant. Let's have a look at how the crisis experts are going to cope with this, what are going to be the priorities in the wake of these explosions this morning. Roger Young joins us now. He's a member of the Institute of Civil Defence and Disaster Studies, and is a former Thames Valley police officer. Very good afternoon, Roger Young. What are the priorities in trying to mop up after such a blast?
There'll be two levels of priority at the moment. At the silver level, the incident commanders will be desperately trying to fix the cordon, the mile cordon that we've heard around the area, to evacuate people who are in line of the smoke, to evacuate them to a safe area and to contain the area as much as they possibly can. The fire staff will be bringing in resources in order to be able to control the extent of the fire, whereas at the gold level, the strategic level, at police headquarters, the strategic command team will be desperately trying to grapple some of the bigger, more complex issues in terms of the spread of the incident, as we've seen the plume, of the side issues like air quality and water quality, of issues like evacuation and what's going to happen to traffic chaos with the M1 shut. Are there going to be school closures and what's going to happen in the area? So there are big decisions for the strategic team to grapple with.
Health and safety has got to be a major priority, hasn't it? There's a lot of people here very concerned about just what damage is being done to their health when they see a cloud of this intensity and density hanging over their homes.
Of course, and the strategic team will have at their heart the environmental protection people, the health agency people, the health protection agency. They will all be part of the strategic team, and the advice that will be coming out from the strategic team will be key to the way in which the public should react in the next few days. I would just add that the standard advice from the Civil Contingency Secretariat in the leaflet that went to all households about 12 months ago, in instances like this, is go in, stay in and tune in. Listen to radio and TV to get the latest advice.
It sounds pretty good advice to me, Roger, but I'm sure that the other thing that's going to have shocked people today is the fact that they had been led to believe that oil fuel depots like this were pretty safe. After all, to attest to that, the fact that Buncefield, the fifth biggest depot of its type in this country, is right on the outskirts of a very major conurbation in Hemel Hempstead, only 20 miles from London.
Yeah, the development of storage facilities such as this are actually rooted quite substantially in history, and I know Buncefield from my childhood, and it was a small oil terminal then, and that's grown and grown and grown as the demand has grown, and with the growth of aviation at Luton and Stansted as well as Heathrow, seen that that depot get bigger and bigger and bigger. Now that's obviously been done, not in a willy-nilly way, but in a planned way with all the agencies involved. But I think that once this is all finished, we cannot say anything other than there's been a massive, catastrophic failure of some part of that site. But we should just reflect on the fact that we sit here now 7 hours after the incident. The injuries are minimal, and although the M1 is closed and there will be substantial damage to the industrial estate nearby, actually the impact has been a lot less than it could have been.
I mean, is that really down to the fact that it was very early on a Sunday morning, Roger? I mean, is that really the only reason it wasn't worse?
Oh yes, there's no doubt that luck has played a major part in this. It's if this had happened at, say, 10 or 11 o'clock on a Monday morning when all those factories were full of people in their offices and children are at school, then this would have been a much more serious test of the emergency services.
Roger Young, disaster expert, former Thames Valley policeman. Appreciate your thoughts today. Thanks very much. And Roger, just reiterating that advice that was on those civil defence and community cards that came round. Go in, stay in, tune in the event of a disaster like this. And as Roger Young was saying, luck has certainly played a major part in this. 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning perhaps was the quietest time it could possibly have been at the Buncefield oil depot. And luck also played a major part in the life of this truck driver who saw the thing go up but managed to get away just in time. Here are his thoughts on what happened just after 6 this morning.
It was just a normal day. We just pulled in, we have to queue up. I was at the front of a queue because all the lorries were in the loading bays filling up. But I could see in between the tanks, the storage tanks, we're facing them with our backs towards the entrance gate. So we're looking at the storage gates and there was 2 Tesco's tanker drivers next to me. And I could see in between the tanks and it just seems like so much, it looked like smoke just coming out of the side of one of the containers. But where I've only been there 6 months, I didn't know. I just thought they might have been cooling off the tanks or whatever, and it just. But I didn't think nothing of it. But apparently the 2 Tesco drivers, they see it and all, and they went over to the office to get someone. In which time I pulled alongside the tank, sat there for another minute, and then as soon as the lorry left the loading bay, I pulled on and went to load the lorry. But I noticed the other drivers who was in the loading bays looking kind of puzzled, looking back at the tanks. So I got out of the lorry, and the guy from the Tesco drivers and that started walking away towards the gates, telling everyone to get away. So we just carried on walking towards the gates, leaving the lorries, shutting all the electric off. That's when all the plant shut down, all the electric went off immediately. And then all of a sudden we heard all the alarm bells ringing in the terminal, and we must have took 5 or 6 more steps, and then there was just a massive explosion. All stuff was flying past us, pipes and things like that, and we was walking up. We just picked ourselves up, don't know how far it threw us, and we just run towards the gates. We had to find holes in the gates because it's all secure there, and scramble through. The 5 drivers, there was 5 drivers I believe there, and 2 guys in the office where we get the bill of lading from. Apparently everyone got out. I looked around and I saw an old guy who works for me, Morris. He was finding it hard to run, so I went back, grabbed his arm, and we were dragging him down. It's then when I saw the flames, because I looked back and they was massive, they was huge, and I just felt like we wasn't far enough away from it, and we was just getting away from it as quick as we could, as far away as possible. Well, the force of the blast threw all of us forward onto the floor. I've hurt me back, it's hurt me back. It just felt like 3 or 4 men just really pushed you hard from behind. But other than that, everyone just seemed to get out miraculously, unarmed, just minor injuries. And when you see the extent of it on the TV, and when I think back and remember the big orange flash all round us, how it lit up the yard, the stuff flying past us, the shaking of the ground, and then I looked at the office where we get the bill of lading from, and it was just devastated. So all the buildings and equipment around us got so badly damaged, but every single one of us got out, got to our feet and managed to run. And we did run, we really did run. I've never run like that before.
Terry Hine with a remarkable story of a man who was a bit too close for comfort there, but at least is in one piece today, and has been one of the remarkable factors in this whole thing that there have been no fatalities, 39 casualties, and no critically injured. And when you consider the force of the blast, that seems to be remarkable. Let's talk to another couple of people who were a bit too close for comfort this morning. Ian Memsack and his daughter Steph. Very nice to see you. Ian, talk us through what happened just after 6.
Well, we were virtually thrown out of bed by this tremendous explosion. We looked at the clock radar beside us. It was about 3 minutes past 6. I rushed to the front window and looked out and didn't see anything, just stars in the sky. So I went to the back window and looked out, and there was this massive mushroom cloud, a couple of 100 feet high, flames 100 feet high in the air, and like fireworks, it almost appeared, shooting up into the air. And the smoke cloud was absolutely huge, and I said straight away to the wife, that's Buncefield, it's got to be, because that's the area it was coming from.
And your first thought, did you have a thought about whether this might be accidental or not?
First I thought maybe a plane from Luton had come down on Buncefield, and then I thought, well, could it be a terrorist attack or something? But like I say, initially I thought maybe a plane had come down on Buncefield from Luton.
How far away is your home from Buncefield?
We're just about 300 or 400 yards from where we're standing now, which I suppose it's a half a mile probably as a crow flies.
So Steph, your daughter Steph, were you thrown out of bed as well?
Sort of. I heard this great big boom in the air, and I just sort of jumped out of bed, and my bed's right by the back window, so my first thought was, when I heard this noise over the Buncefield direction, to jump up to the window and look out there, and I just caught what seemed to be the tail end of like a load of flames, and there was like a spark like firework effect in the air, and then this great big cloud, and at first I had no idea what it was. I just thought it was just some sort of strange explosion, and then when Dad woke up and said that it was Buncefield, it all sort of clicked in together that it was probably the oil depot.
Ian, was your first instinct one of sort of fear or surprise or shock? I mean, I presume very mixed emotions.
Shock, absolute shock really. I mean, because the explosion was so huge. I mean, it actually blew our loft hatch out. It's lucky we didn't hit a head on it, because it was just hanging on in the edge of the loft hole there. And but I mean, we were shaking. We were literally, you know, we were so scared of what it might be.
And then there were blasts a little after the first one.
We heard 3 more blasts afterwards. They must have been about quarter of an hour or so, 20 minutes afterwards. But we did hear another 3.
And what was your instinct? Was it to sort of clear out of the area, batten down the hatches? What did you do?
We actually switched the television on, and the only channel covering it at the time was Sky, and we tuned straight into that, and we were trying to work out what was happening from Sky News.
I'm pleased to hear about that. Were you tempted, Steph, to sort of clear out of the area? Did you worry that it might get worse?
No, not really. It was still quite away from us, but the first instinct was just to switch on the TV or the radio, something, see if they'd heard reports of anything, just to try and find out what it was.
When you found out it was the fuel depot there, I mean, had it ever worried you that this huge fuel depot was so near, or you never thought it would be a problem?
Never really thought of it being a problem. I mean, I knew it was there, but I didn't really think that it was likely to go up any time.
Ian, your thoughts on that? I mean, it is a very big depot, isn't it? You obviously have great faith in the people who run it.
But you never think that anything like this it will happen on your doorstep, so we never really had any thoughts about it.
What about the health factor? I mean, that looks a pretty ugly cloud up there. You must be worried about getting anywhere near it, breathing in the air.
Well, at first, just after the first explosion, the smoke cloud was right over our house. Since then, the direction has changed. It's more easterly. But right at the start, it was directly over our house, and we were worried about going outside, just in case there was anything nasty, you know, in the smoke, anything hazardous.
And what's your plan now, your family? You're going to, I mean, everybody seems very stoical. You all seem to be willing to stay here rather than evacuate.
Well, as long as the cloud is going that way, we're not too worried. If the wind well, there's no wind really, but if it does change direction, we will go back indoors and shut all the windows and doors and stay there.
Very wise. Good advice, well taken. Ian and Steph Memsack, thank you very much for your thoughts. So a couple of the many people around here who were rudely awakened this morning at 6:03 by the most extraordinary explosion. There have been many more. Our Sky News reporters have been out and about talking to some of the other eyewitnesses today.
It's about 6:05, a massive explosion. I don't think any damage in the house, and we just got up with the wife and kids woke up obviously, frightened the life out of them, and well, we've moved up to Gaybridge for the time being, which is just up the road to my brother's house. I mean, out of my daughter's bedroom, the flames were, you know, which is right back over there, the flames are massive, and you know, we didn't know what was going on, thought it was a bomb or an aeroplane going down, or, you know, we just didn't know.
I was awake this morning when the explosion took place, and we live about 2 miles the other side of town. My office is actually by where the explosion is, and I was here early this morning, maybe 6:10, something like that, and it was just incredible. So there's a lot of damage to buildings, a lot of cladding that's blown off of the buildings, you know, the steel frames, and you know, the guys are saying, the DHL guy that was there just was saying that the building behind them has been flattened, which is probably about half a mile actually from where the terminal is. So it was incredible, and it was a long explosion. It wasn't just a boom, it was a long explosion. The houses rattled. It lasted 3 or 4 seconds. It wasn't just a single explosion. And then there's been one or possibly two since. And it was calm as well. There were no emergency services immediately. It seemed as if everybody, it was a surreal experience. And well, as you can see.
Just went and bang, you know. It sounded like something, sounded like a missile or something. You know what, it wasn't, but it sounded like there was a big whoosh and a bang, and that was it. You know, frightened us all. We didn't know what to do. As you can see, the police and we only live around the corner. But our house is alright. There's other houses in the street that have had the windows blown out and whatever as well, so I don't know. It's all very frightening.
You're watching Sky News. It's around 1:30 on December the 11th, the Sunday morning that's brought a big surprise and a shock to many of the people around this area of Hertfordshire in the southeast of England. Let's just remind you of the main headlines today on Sky News. A key oil depot near Hemel Hempstead is in flames after being rocked by 3 huge explosions just after 6 a.m. this morning. Officials say 39 people are injured, 2 seriously. There are no fatalities. Many buildings were damaged by the blast, which are being treated as accidents. The first blast was heard at least 40 miles away, while nearby residents said they were woken by a huge boom as their houses shook. 2 other explosions were heard 20 minutes later. The area around the depot has been evacuated. The area around the depot has been evacuated. People are being warned to stay indoors as thick smoke continues to billow into the sky. Police are warning there could be more explosions. Let's hear from the Defence Secretary, Dr. John Reid.
Well, as far as we're aware, on the police advice, this is still regarded as an accident, Adam. Obviously, everything that is being done, everything that can be done is being done. I understand, and I fully understand why you might have to nip over quickly to a press conference. The police will be releasing further details of that. The armed forces, as ever, are on standby if necessary, but we've received no request for such assistance at the moment. So I think at this stage we leave it with the police to get on, and the emergency agencies to get on with the job, which they always carry out so professionally.
Dr. John Reid, the Defence Secretary, with his comments a couple of hours after the blast took place. He was talking to Adam Bolton earlier this morning on Sky News. Let's just remind you of some of the impact and implications of these huge blasts, the effect of which you can still see very clearly billowing up behind me with this intense, dense black smoke. We don't know exactly what's in there. We'll try and get a better fix on just how damaging it could be to health. But let's look at the fact that there are 2 pipelines which are going to be affected by this blast. The first transports petrol, diesel and other fuels from Lindsay Old Refinery in North Lincolnshire to the Buncefield terminal at Hemel Hempstead, and that operates 24 hours a day. From here, the oil is distributed to industry, including Heathrow Airport. We've also heard that it goes to Luton as well, and Stansted Airport. And of course, the fuels also take down to the wider community in the southeast of England. And the second pipeline begins at Colnbrook in Slough. Fuel from Hemel Hempstead is transported on the 23-mile journey to Colnbrook by rail, and then from here it's transferred into a 12-inch wide pipeline that runs directly to Heathrow Airport. So as you can gather from that, damage to Buncefield could have a huge knock-on effect, not only to people expecting fuel for their businesses and for their cars, but also particularly for the aviation industry as well. Let's catch up with Roger Young again, our civil defence and disaster study expert who's in the studio with us in London. Roger, good to talk to you again. Listening to the people here, the eyewitnesses around the plant, I'm amazed at how sanguine they are that they've got this huge fuel depot with quite clearly millions of tons of fuel oil in it right in the middle of their community, and up to now they had great faith that nothing was going to happen.
Well, that's what we get when we talk this subject through with communities in relation to anything, whether it's arms dumps, oil dumps or chemical works. People are very trusting of the authorities, and I think that they have a good reason to trust people, because the amount of planning that goes into not only the construction but also the testing of contingency plans is very extensive in this country. In fact, we're world leaders in the way in which we test contingency plans, and a testament to that can be the result of today's awful incident, really, in that everything's gone so well, and so many people have praised the way in which the emergency services have responded.
Let's bring in Jeff Charlton now, who's from Disasters UK. Jeff Charlton, good to talk to you. I remember 30 years ago covering the Flixborough disaster up on Humberside, which was a chemical plant that exploded in a similarly devastating way. Sadly, there were fatalities, but this, as far as I remember, is probably the biggest blast of its type at an industrial plant since then.
I would agree. There's, of course, you could bring in Bhopal, which was another one in India that's had huge and catastrophic.
Sadly, I covered that as well, Jeff, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah. I'm a little bit more concerned about some of the incidents, some of the reports and some of the eyewitness accounts, you know, where we've just seen a driver that was working in the plant loading his vehicle with fuel and said he saw fumes coming out of the tank, and he didn't know what to do because he's only worked there 6 months. It shows a little bit of a lack of training, and then when he asked the other drivers what they should do, and they calmly walked over to the office where the bill of lading is. I was quite surprised. I was surprised too that the alarms didn't go off where these tanks, if there were fumes coming out the tanks, they're obviously leaking out, which means it was pressurised, and certainly there should have been pressure sensors there, and it seems to me that safety at this plant isn't quite what we should have expected.
Jeff, going on what information you've heard from those eyewitnesses to talk about a possible leak, can you put together a scenario of what could have happened, what could have triggered such a massive explosion?
No, I've got no expertise in that field. All I can see is that obviously it has expanded, vapours have come off and it's ignited. The tanks that's there, I think there was 12 that we saw. They are domed, roofed in shape normally, and they're designed to explode and release the build-up of pressure. Otherwise there would have been a huge, I mean, it was bad enough explosion as it was, which blew the roof off of the storage tanks, but if it had been worse, or sorry, if they'd have been heavily constructed and they didn't give, they're designed to give, if they didn't give, it would have been a much, much worse explosion.
Let's bring in Ray Holloway, a familiar figure. He's the spokesman for the Petrol Retailers Association. Ray Holloway, your thoughts as you sort of start to address the scale of this disaster and the impact that it will have on the petrochemical industry?
Well, I think the best way to sum that up, Jeremy, is to say that in real terms, Buncefield is a strategically important oil depot. It's not a critical supply depot in terms of the supply of products into North London and indeed Herts, Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire. There are many other depots that can now switch into supplying all products to the customers in those areas. So as we've seen this morning at some filling stations across the area, panic buying, absolutely no need for that whatsoever.
Let's stress that again, absolutely no need for panic buying. And Ray Holloway, what you're saying is that there are sufficient supplies. We don't work on an hour-by-hour basis in this country for fuel supply.
We do not, and we're dealing in an industry here where the regulation that is applied to this industry actually is very demanding, and the oil industry that is actually responding to this emergency exceeds the maximum expectations of it. And I would fully expect within the next few hours that they will already have planned how fuel will be delivered from the many other locations around London and the southeast into North London for tomorrow and the rest of the week.
Do you sense that there might be a bigger impact on the aviation industry rather than the transport and domestic fuel needs?
No, I don't really. I think where Heathrow and Gatwick are concerned, there are very, very robust plans for the supply of aviation fuel into those airports. It is fed by pipeline, and there are other accesses. So although the terminal at Buncefield did provide product into both Heathrow and indeed other airports around like Luton, then again I expect the industry to respond to the alternatives. Let's also bear in mind here in the southeast there are many other points of access for oil products. Thames estuary, for example, if we were dealing with a big enough emergency. I don't believe we are, from what I've heard this morning, and I do expect that within the next 24 hours or so there'll be some calming messages about how the industry will deal with this.
The sooner the better, one imagines, because people clearly will be worried. It is such a huge explosion. The cloud of smoke can be seen by probably many millions of people around the southeast of England, and we're also shocked when something like this happens right in the heart of our communities, aren't we?
Yes, we are, and the point I would make to that is that when oil burns, it unfortunately creates the thick black smoke that we have over Buncefield this morning. But it really is something that hopefully over a period of time will actually die down. Unfortunately, when the oil is not contained within an area and you can't smother and take away the oxygen that's feeding it, it will have to be allowed to burn out by and large.
And talking about that smoke that you can see behind me and see from our various Sky News cameras around the area, how dangerous is the content of that big black cloud?
I'm not in a position to answer that question because I really don't know what products are involved here. There are a number of very large storage tanks at Buncefield, and I'm afraid I don't know which ones are involved in this incident.
But your feeling is, as a spokesman for the petrol industry, that supplies should be running pretty smoothly within, say, 24 to 48 hours, and that there is absolutely no need to panic.
There certainly is absolutely no need to panic. The key thing here is not to overwhelm the filling stations in this local area or indeed any other area today. There is certainly every expectation of the oil companies concerned to have normal fuel deliveries restored certainly within the next 24 hours.
Ray Holloway from Petrol Retailer Association, Roger Young and Jeff Charlton are disasters experts who I think are staying with us for a little longer. Thank you very much for the moment. Let's just remind ourselves what Hertfordshire Police had to say earlier in the morning when they were making their first public statements and trying to explain what had happened and what the effects had been. Among those speaking, the Chief Constable of Hertfordshire, Frank Whiteley.
All indications at this stage are that this was an accident. However, clearly we will keep an open mind as with all investigations, until we can confirm that for certain. We currently have around 100 police officers working at the scene, with higher numbers of fire service personnel also at the scene. As a result of the operation at the scene, we are anticipating that there will be further explosions during the morning, and we want to reassure the public that that is nothing untoward and is now expected. In terms of the site itself, there were a number of staff at the site at the time of the accident, and work is clearly still being undertaken to assess and collate information about their status. However, at this stage we believe there are around 36 casualties, and I would emphasise that the vast majority of these are not serious injuries and are being treated at local hospitals. We think at the moment about 4 people are more seriously injured.
Frank Whiteley, the Hertfordshire Chief Constable, explaining the facts of the matter this morning as events unfolded during the course of the morning. It's very much a matter for Hertfordshire Police, trying to allay people's fears here, giving out good advice. Some people, of course, have been evacuated, others being advised, whether in the path of the smoke, to stay inside, batten down the hatches and tune in, preferably to Sky News, but at least keep tuned and find out what's going on, and then we can help the public authorities in advising you what's going on if you're concerned about what's happened. But the police were saying, of course, there could be further blasts during the course of the day. We certainly haven't heard any in the last couple of hours or so since we've been in this position overlooking the plant, but no let-up in that huge column of black smoke, very, very dense smoke. I'm not going to say it's toxic because I haven't yet been informed whether that is right to call it that, but it certainly looks pretty noxious, shall we say, and pretty unpleasant for anybody who may be caught in the path. We'll have more on the disaster at the Buncefield oil depot and be talking to more of the experts on how they're going to clean up this mess coming up right after this break on Sky News.
The Saturday night premiere in association with Panasonic.
I got 5 stops to make.
What's your name?
Max.
Max. I'm Vincent.
I'm not up for this.
Tom Cruise.
Just take comfort knowing you never had a choice.
Academy Award winner Jenny Fox.
You just met him once and you kill him like that? But I should only kill people after I get to know them.
Director Michael Mann.
Good news. We're ahead of schedule.
Collateral. Saturday at 8 and 10 on Sky Movies.
Do you remember how exciting Christmas was when you were a little kid? Then did it all get a little bit sort of samey? Not anymore. Sainsbury's parsnips are really good right now. So this Christmas, just give them a drizzle with a little bit of maple syrup for the last couple of minutes, then chuck in some dry cured streaky bacon. Gorgeous. Go on, try something new today. Very funny.
This JVC digital camcorder is half price, only $249. At Currys, we're spending Christmas lowering prices. This Kenwood food processor is down to $49.99. And this Kenwood hand blender is $19.99, both half price. Currys, always lowering prices.
The Black & Decker Dustbuster for powerful suction. With advanced cyclonic technology, helping to clear up after your little cyclones again and again.
Imagine a new feeling of freshness during your period with Always New Pad and Wipe combination. Always feel fresh with Always and Freshell.
The new Decamate from Black & Decker has a powerful scraper, sander and screwdriver. So the preparation gets done a lot quicker than some people might have thought.
Nicht gründlich genug. Immer noch einzelne Haare. Besser. Das ist es.
Introducing Braun's Power Comb that captures more missed hairs than ever before. The Braun 360 Complete, our closest, most complete shaver ever.
Very good afternoon. You're watching Sky News Sunday. We're on the outskirts of Hemel Hempstead. As you can see from that huge black smokestack in the distance, we are very close to where there were major explosions earlier today. Let's just take you through the main points in the headlines today. This key oil depot at Buncefield near Hemel Hempstead is in flames still after being rocked by 3 huge explosions soon after 6 o'clock this morning. Officials are saying that 39 people have been injured, 2 of them seriously, none critically, and there have been remarkably no fatalities. Many buildings were damaged by the blasts, which are being treated as accidents. Well, the first explosion was heard more than 40 miles away, while nearby residents said they were woken up by the loud boom as their houses shook. Some said they were literally thrown from their beds. 2 other explosions followed some 20 minutes later. The area around the Buncefield depot has been evacuated. People are being warned to stay indoors as this thick black smoke continues to billow into the sky. The police are warning that more explosions are likely. Parts of the M1 have been sealed off for the moment as the smoke drifts across the M1. Let's just take you back a few hours. Many people here, of course, rudely awakened from their slumber early on Sunday morning, not only grabbed some clothes, but luckily for us, grabbed some cameras as well. So a lot of people have been out and busy early in the morning, and were able to capture images of this huge explosion, this furnace that erupted early in the morning, and the damage that it's done. And some of these pictures just starting to come into us through our Sky teams around this Hemel Hempstead area. As you can see, the black smoke in the distance, and a lot of buildings close to the plant have been very badly damaged. A lot of walls and windows have been blown out. As all our experts have been saying, the remarkably lucky thing is it was 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, so very few people around, and that has kept this casualty list thankfully pretty low so far. 39 people injured, a couple of them seriously, but a hospital spokesman saying a while ago none critically, and the emergency services saying there don't appear to have been any fatalities from what they can see. But you can see in the rear of that shot the flames billowing up right in the heart of that huge black smokestack that's rising several hundred feet into the sky. And so you can see from the screen there, and not surprisingly when you see these pictures, that about half of this huge Buncefield depot has been destroyed. That's what police are saying. They've had a chance to go and reconnoitre the area now, although still keeping their distance. Obviously there's very intense flames right at the heart of the blaze, and then this huge black cloud of which it's uncertain exactly how serious the content is, how damaging it could be to health. So these pictures still show the enormity of this smokestack, and when I say that I could see it some 30 miles away as I was driving towards it earlier this morning, and I'm sure many people in North London and around this part of the country will all tell you that they got a pretty good view of it. It is dominating the skyline. It's just north of the junction of the M1 and the M25 motorways, familiar to most people in Britain who've toured around the motorways of the country. And this is right over that junction and continuing to pour down to the eastern side of the country. Morning, I think we have a guest here. I'm just going to bring in our microphone. Afternoon, sir. Can I ask your name?
My name's Ian Stowe.
Ian Stowe. You don't look in particularly good shape, but at least you're smiling. Tell us your story.
Well, I was lying in bed at 6 o'clock this morning when all of a sudden I was just hit with a massive force, which turned out to be the bedroom windows, complete with frames and everything. And somehow, although I was asleep, bits of glass got in my eye. And so been down and had it sort of washed out, and back now trying to put the house back together with one eye.
How are you feeling?
I feel fine. I felt really shook up at the time because I've got my wife and the children in the house with me, and once I sort of satisfied myself in a few seconds that they were okay, there was then, well, what had happened? It looked like a truck had come through the side of the house. So is there something in the house? Is it going to explode? Are we better off being outside? Should we stay inside? So just sort of mad panic, on top of which I couldn't see anything. We got to a point in the end where I thought, actually, although I feel like I want to be with my family, I'm so completely useless that I'd better just go down to A&E and get myself straightened out. So got straightened out, they've got some glass out, I'll be okay. We're just sort of sticking things back together. But the patio doors are on the patio, the garage doors are on the drive, the bedroom's sort of staved in. My wife's not best amused, and
well, I mean, the first thing is, personally, we're very pleased that you're pretty much in one piece.
I'm absolutely amazed at the number of injuries and the seriousness of them is so low. That's fantastic.
And yet you'd lived with this thing pretty much in your back garden, Buncefield.
I'd never thought about it. Absolutely, never thought about it at all. No.
Never seen it as a threat.
Never seen it as a threat. Indeed, when the explosion occurred, that wasn't really what I was thinking of. There's actually a Calagas depot, and because it felt as if something weighing a huge amount had come into the house and flattened me, I thought it was Calagas bottles going up. So no, I'd never thought about that. And I dare say, in due course, I won't think about it again.
I mean, one or two people, obviously, one of the early thoughts was, crikey, a plane's come down, or it could be a terrorist attack. I guess there was a scramble of things going through.
There was. My children were awake when it occurred, and they mentioned that the house had been shaking. And so then you think, well, why was it shaking before the blast? But a neighbour who's an engineer says with a big blast, you often get some early sort of lower pressure waves that arrive before the big one.
So it felt like sort of tremors, did it?
According to my children, I was fast asleep. We'd had an enjoyable evening last night, so I was sleeping it off, as they say.
That'll clear your head anyway.
Absolutely, yeah.
How near do you live to Buncefield?
We're somewhere between half a mile, quarter of a mile, about a half a mile. Nothing between us and the oil depot. In terms of sort of large structures that would have protected us, we've got there's a disused railway line, the Nicky line, that runs along the back of the house, and we're slightly low against that. So that may have given us a little bit of shelter. But the damage is very particular. There'll be one house like ours which is really quite badly damaged, then two or three which don't look as if they've been affected at all, and then another which is...
So it's almost like shock waves hit you, was it?
Oh, well, yes. I mean, what it felt like, it honestly felt like someone had thrown a massive boulder into the house that had hit me, but it must have been shockwaves, because when you look at the house, it's most peculiar. There are some very substantial structures like patio doors completely demolished, but flimsy fences which are completely unaffected.
How do your neighbours fare? Are you in a
no, we're not. We're in an estate. I'm the only one who managed to pick up an injury for my sins, but lots of window damage. We're a bit concerned about the structural damage because it's clear that some roofs have lifted a little bit. So we're sort of clearing up the stuff you can see, and we're hoping that stuff doesn't come down and land on us. And
I was going to say, I mean, you've got a wife and young family at home. And that smokestack now become as big a worry as anything else?
Not particularly, because it's so visible. If it was sort of invisible fumes, then...
You don't know what's in it, do you?
You don't know what's in it, but you can smell it and you can see it. Or rather, you can't smell it at the moment. And we're close enough to the countryside that if we see it heading our way, we'll disappear. We've put panels in all the windows and the doors that have been knocked out, so we're happy that we can go if we have to.
I mean, what are you thinking at the moment? Stay put?
Oh, absolutely, stay put. No. We've added to the sort of the usual weekend list of 36 chores, including sort of tidying up the garden, and there's now tidying up all the damage. So no, we'll absolutely stay put and get it done if we possibly can.
Well, I mean, you're being very stoical about all this, but I mean, it must have been one heck of a shot this morning.
I was quite wobbly at 6:05. Yeah, when we didn't know what was going on, and when of course the house looks just such a mess, as I suppose. I mean, it's the first time I've ever been in a situation like this, but I guess now we've cleared up, although the damage is bad, it's not the complete whirlwind of havoc that it appeared at.
Well, and you and your family are in pretty much one piece.
Absolutely, we are, yeah. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the day.
I hope Christmas gets better for you, Ian Stone. That's very kind of you to come straight out of hospital and talk to us, but as you can see, and among the walking wounded there, and that is the most remarkable thing, that because it fortunately happened on a Sunday morning at 6 a.m, the casualties are remarkably low. 39 casualties, no fatalities. We'll have more on the Buncefield blast in just a moment.
Now I'm gonna be under the tree. I'm gonna be with you. You'll be with me. Now I'm gonna be under the tree. gonna be with you. You'll be with
Bring your world together with Vodafone Live with 3G this Christmas. Make the most of now. Vodafone.
The new range of Kenwood smoothie makers. Bring fruit to life.
Prices are coming down at Comet this Christmas, like this massage chair and footstool down to £79. Comet, we live electricals.
Fact: bacteria can make even the cleanest home smell. Air fresheners often just mask smells with overpowering fragrances. Dettol Neutra Air is not an air freshener, but an air treatment that neutralizes smells, even those caused by bacteria. Dettol Neutra Air, the air treatment. And now as a plug-in for up to 80 days of freshness.
The gate is open. Order before the end of December and get super fast Bulldog broadband for £9.75 a month. Fixed for as long as you're with us. Up to 8 meg broadband for £9.75 a month. Call now on 08000 15 16 17. Bulldog. Broadband and phone.
Fahrenheit. Fahrenheit.
55. 3.
Fahrenheit. Pour l'homme de Christian Dior.
This Christmas, you can get free Sky